Welcome to the Behavior-Based Interview module. We're happy you're interested in learning about behavior-based interview process, which is a structured interview process that leads to the selection of the right candidate for the right position. This module is for anyone who actively participates in the hiring process. For example, if you're a family member who employs a direct support professional, a supervisor, a manager, or a leader working in the developmental services, this module is for you. Having a clear understanding of the competencies is critical to being effective in conducting behavior-based interviews. We recommend you complete the Introduction to Core Competencies and Coaching for Competencies module prior to taking behavior-based interview training. The introduction to the modules will give you a thorough understanding of the 10 core competencies and should provide you with the skills for assessing competencies. Make sure you use the Core Competency Dictionary when needed during the training process. The objective of this module is to build your capability in conducting behavior-based interviews and assessing candidate data for evidence of competencies by practicing conducting behavior-based interviews, including probing for quotable data, taking effective notes, and coding candidate data for competencies. In this module, we'll be introducing you to the knowledge required for conducting the behavior-based interview process. However, we recommend practice the application of the knowledge to gain experience and expertise you need to effectively conduct behavior-based interviews by arranging mock interviews. Throughout the workshop, there are two key skills that we will be focusing on. Firstly, getting codable data, which is about gathering data from the candidate that is linked to the competencies identified for success in the role. You need to know what to look for to be able to probe effectively. What you're looking for is codable data, which is your evidence that someone has the competencies you're trying to evaluate. Probing, which is basis of behavior-based interview, is about asking questions to get the codable data that you need from the candidate to enable you to make an objective, accurate assessment of the candidate's suitability for the job you're seeking to fill. The cost of a poor selection decision can be substantial. According to a 2017 career building survey, the average cost of a bad hire is nearly $15,000 and possibly more depending on the position. To calculate the cost of hiring mistake, you need to consider all possible related costs, direct and indirect, which could include a cost associated with recruitment and selection, the individual's base salary and benefits, orientation, training, and development. It takes on average 3 to 6 months for a new employee to be fully performing. Low productivity and quality while a poor performer is in the role, loss of opportunity, for example, missed opportunities to build community connections, lower morale as others struggle to pick up the slack, a poor job or person fit and the associated negative impact, dissatisfied people supported, families or community members who may form a negative long-term perspective of your organization. That's why making the right hiring decision strengthens overall performance, helps build morale, provides you with the source of skilled people for future job promotions, and serves as significant time and money involved correcting a hiring mistake. This involves considerable thought and preparation. Remember, however, the quality of the individual you select is a function of the time and energy you commit to the recruitment, interviewing, and selection process. So, if a bad hire is so costly, why do we make such mistakes? For example, hiring based on gut feeling can lead to bad hires. It is critical to have a systemic hiring process in place to increase your chances of making a good hire. Hiring based on personality versus competencies and skills can also be problematic because people tend to hire those who are just like themselves. Another reason why we make some of these mistakes is we're unclear about the job criteria. There's a tendency to focus on a wish list instead of 6 to 8 key criteria for success in the position. Often, we try to duplicate the person who was previously in the position. This goes back to the criteria for success. If you're unclear about the key criteria for success, you'll tend to focus on finding someone most like the last person in the job. The interview is the time to gather information from the candidate to assess the candidate's suitability for the position. So if the interviewer does all the talking instead of asking the questions and listening to the candidate, they lose the opportunity to assess the candidate's fit for the job. Inadequate reference checks are another reason for making a wrong hiring decision. Reference checks, if conducted properly, can yield valuable information. Too often, just a few cursory questions are asked. Now that we know the importance of selecting the right candidate, let's look deeper into the behavior-based interview. The interview is your primary mechanism for gathering data about a candidate. Behavioral interviewing will provide you with the objective data you need to make an informed selection decision. It follows a structured process that enables you to explore the competencies a candidate has demonstrated in the past. This is important because we know that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Use targeted competency-based questions to gather evidence of the candidate's competencies relative to behavioral and technical skills required for success in the role. In addition, behavior-based interviewing minimizes the potential for bias by the interviewer. This type of interview focuses on past performance and capability, which increases objectivity and accuracy in selection decisions. This type of interviewing tends to be viewed by candidates as a fair and equitable process, and even though people may not be selected, they tend to feel more positive about the process and can be more readily identified when they fall short. Overall, behavior-based interview increases objectivity and accuracy in selection decisions. In traditional interviews, interviewers tend to ask hypothetical situation questions. For example, what would you do in this situation? Which may not elicit what a candidate would actually do in a certain situation. So, for example, if an interviewer asks, how would you handle X, Y, and Z situation? The candidate can easily provide the right answer. How does the interviewer know, after all, if the candidate will really react in a given situation the way they said they would? In addition, candidates may try to tell interviewers what they think they would want to hear or give rehearsed answers to questions. This may result in a more biased, ineffective selection decisions. Therefore, many employers are moving away from traditional interview questions and including more behavioral interview questions in their interviews. What's worse is that many interviewers just wing it by asking their favorite questions, which may or may not relate to the job's success. In a behavior-based interview, the interviewer asks the candidate questions that elicit how they have demonstrated specific behaviors in the past. For example, tell me about a time you had to. This way of questioning makes it more difficult to give responses that are not true to one's character. When the candidate relays a behavioral story, the interviewer will probe by trying to get the specific behavior or behaviors demonstrated and probe for more depth or details such as, what were you thinking at that point? Or, tell me more about your meeting with that person. Or, lead me through your decision-making process. With the level of probing required to effectively conduct a behavior-based interview, it is very difficult for a candidate to be less than honest. The goal of behavior-based interviewing is to find the candidate whose competencies best match those required for success in the job or role. A good fit shortens the learning curve. If there's not a good fit between an individual's competencies and the requirements of the job, additional effort may be necessary to carry out the job. Ultimately, a poor job person fit will lead to a turnover, which, as discussed earlier, can be very costly for the employer. Behavior-based interviewing helps to ensure that the people you hire have potential to succeed. This competency-based approach can also be used to provide appropriate development to help employees realize their potential. Coding is about making the links between what you hear in an interview and what you're looking for, which is the specific competencies at a specific level of expertise. You want to start by correctly determining if what the candidate is saying is in fact codable information, and if so, how do you code it so you know what competency it reflects. So what is codable information? Quotable information reveals what a candidate said, thought, did, and felt in a particular situation. That allows you to determine what competencies and stages they have demonstrated in the past. Information provided by a candidate is quotable if it meets certain criteria. Firstly, it must clearly attribute to the interviewee. People often talk in terms of we. When we're gathering information from a candidate, you want to find out what the candidate actually said or did. In other words, their actions, thoughts, and feelings. Secondly, it must have occurred in the past. Actions, thoughts, and feelings that occurred at the time of the incident being described are codable. Anything that the candidate says they would do differently in the future may be interesting, but it is not codable. It hasn't actually occurred. Thirdly, it must be volunteered by the interviewee. Information the candidate volunteers is codable. Information coming from the leading questions is not. For example, asking a candidate, "Were you angry?" This is a leading question and the answer is not codable. In this case, it would be better to ask, "How did you feel it when that happened?" This does not lead the candidate to give a certain answer. Fourthly, it must be specific. General information is not codable. It must be specific behavior. For example, supported their goal is not codable. Instead, I offered multiple courses that would help the person I was supporting achieve their literacy goal. Is codable information because it reveals specific actions. Let's look at some examples. Terms such as we or the team are not codable. Use of I phrases help the interviewer clearly understand what the candidate's role was. Statements describing what the interviewee currently or typically does or hopes to do in the future is not codable. The interviewer should probe for examples that demonstrate past behavior. The candidate's current attitude, reflections, and hindsight about past situations are not codable as they do not speak to the behavior at the time. The candidate's thoughts and feelings at the time of the example given are codable as they speak to the intent and thought at the time when the incident happened. Specific examples are always codable compared to summarized and vague descriptions. Let's look at some examples. I made arrangements to take the person I supported to the Pride Parade. This statement is quotable because it describes the person's specific behaviors. On the right, the response, "I believe that everyone belongs," and "I make the workplace inclusive," are not quotable as they are not specific and it is not clear what the candidate actually did. From the response on the left, can you identify which competency is being demonstrated? The answer is valuing equity, diversity, and inclusion. This demonstrates the emerging stage, which includes the notion of valuing and respecting all people. Congratulations! You've completed part 1 of the behavior-based interview module. Complete the quiz on the codable data, and I look forward to seeing you in part 2 of the module.